celebrate Jack Kerouac's birthday in March of 2018 and 2019. The Pollard Memorial Library organized marathon readings of his iconic novel, On the Road, in Lowell, Massachusetts. These events lasted more than 12 hours each and drew hundreds of readers and spectators from all over the world to celebrate the life and legacy of Lowell's legendary writer. In 2020, a more ambitious marathon reading was planned for Kerouac's first novel, The Town and the City. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the publication of The Town and the City. The novel follows the fortunes of the Martins family in pre- and post-World War II America. The story plays out in a town called Galloway, a fictionalized version of Lowell, and later in New York City. It was estimated the Town and the City marathon would take roughly 18 hours to complete over 2 days in late March 2020. Then the COVID-19 pandemic struck, and the marathon was scuttled. The library and its partners hope to be able to hold the marathon again in 2021 and for many years to come. In the meantime, we got a few folks together this holiday season to read a Christmas-themed chapter from The Town and the City. The chapter is told from the perspective of the youngest member of the Martin family, 6-year-old Mickey Martin. Christmas Eve celebrations are afoot in typical Galloway fashion: pond ice skating, a holiday dinner party with food, drink, and song, followed by a solemn family trip to midnight mass. Kerouac didn't give the chapter a title, but we're calling it Mickey Martin's Christmas Eve. Enjoy.
When Christmas Eve came that year, the winds died down as if pious. A hush nipping cold descended and caked the snow and filled the air with a silent, locked frostiness. After nightfall, huge and lustrous winter stars appeared to reign over the miraculous stillness of the night. To little Mickey, it was all miraculous. A simple verity, the truth of Christmas, which was the doing of little child Jesus and of God, which he, Michael Martin, was tremblingly and joyously prepared and given over. The very sheen of starlight on the glossy snows, the little red and blue and green lights in the windows of homes, the icicles hanging from the eaves, all these things in the silence of mystery and prophecy fulfilled were the altar flickers and divine meetings that had to come every year at Christmas.
Reared in the Catholic myths and understanding, he walked in the frosty night and was a saint. Little Mickey, moody, dreamy, full of childlike reverie, was wrapped in the silence of pieties, while all the others laughed and yelled and talked and enjoyed themselves. Like it was New Year's already, he thought darkfully, almost scornfully. They had all been skating at the pond a mile or so down Galloway Road in the evening. Everybody, all the kids, Peter, Charlie, Liz, her girlfriends, Peter's chums, Joe, some of his buddies, and boys and girls from all around, dancing like shadows by the roaring bonfire and scooping around in great swishing zigzags. Some of them are singing and yelling. Some, like Peter and his friends Danny and Scotcho and Ernest Burlow Jr., were nipping out the bottles of brandy. Some, like Liz and her boyfriend Buddy Fredericks, were skating in beautiful arm-locked waltzes.
The night's numb, frosted air was sharp with cries and murmurs and shrieks. But Mickey skated around the fringes of the pond, alone, thinking, looking up at the North Star, running a stick in front of him like Dick Clapper, the hockey star, pushing along doggedly, deep in his own amazing thoughts about Christmas and everything. And once in a while, when no one was near, singing Silent Night, Holy Night in a small, high voice like the choir boys at midnight mass. Once Charlie came wobbling over on skates to show him the big studded Western cowboy belt Joe had brought him for Christmas. "But you ain't supposed to look at the presents till midnight," cried Mickey.
"It's all right. Joe said it was all right to wear it skating tonight. But you can't do that," scoffed Mickey. "Don't you know nothing about Christmas? You didn't open my presents, did you?" "I didn't even know where it was." "Say," Charlie laughed savagely, "Rosie was looking for you. She's looking for your presents to wrap 'em up in paper. She's been wrapping presents all day, up in the bedroom with big piles all over the bed, and she's wrapping them with ribbons. Did you know there's a big party going at the house now? Mr. Cartier and Mr. Mulligan and Mrs. Cartier and Mrs. Mulligan and everybody. Pa's in the kitchen making drinks, and they're playing the piano and singing. It's crazy over to the house.
I rapped to myself, muttered Mickey, and they're hid, and nobody can see them till midnight. They're hid in the cellar. What? My presents? What did you get me, Mick? What did you get me? I bet you can't never guess what I got you. They had bought scout knives for each other, and they both thought it was going to be a big surprise, too. On the other hand, they both wanted scout knives. At 11 o'clock, Peter, their big brother Peter, a hero of heroes, captain of captains among the little high school football players who were skating all over their pond with their Galloway G's on heavy woolen sweaters and nodding and blushing whenever Peter chanced to look their way. An unfathomable football player at Olympian Penn. Their big brother Peter was standing on the bank with his skates around his neck by the roaring bonfire, calling out to them through cupped hands. Hey, Mick. Hey, Charlie. Come on home. We're all getting a ride home.
Everybody piled into a rattling car that belonged to Ernest Burlow and Peter's wild chums, who were a little drunk now. They wanted Peter to join them in further celebrations in the Rooney Street saloons, and they all went speeding back down Galloway Road. Joe and Liz singing crazy songs, Mickey sitting on Peter's lap in front, some other kids from down the road riding on the running board and yelling in the wind. Burlow, the driver, tooting the horn, wild and insistent. When they came in sight of the Martin house, Mickey's heart filled with pleasure when he saw the soft lights in the windows and the curl of smoke winding from the chimney. He knew that Christmas was always beautiful.
Every room in the Martin house that night was lighted up to serve one purpose or another. When they parked in front, they could hear a chorus of voices singing in the front room, and great adult roars of laughter, the celebrating elders thawing a big time. Just like it was Saturday night, Mickey thought darkly again. The kids giggled and peeked in from the front porch at Martin and Mrs. Martin, and the Cartiers and the Mulligans and other guests who were gathered around the piano with drinks in their hands. George Martin, almost as drunk as a lord, was singing loudest of them all, while the mother sat at the piano playing with a radiant and happy flush on her face. It made Mickey happy, yet somehow sad to see his mother laughing and playing the piano like that. At Christmas, he always liked to just sit beside her on the couch.
She let him have red port wine to drink with the walnuts and watch the long, soft lights of the tree, red and blue and green, and listen to Scrooge on the radio and everybody opening the Christmas presents after midnight mass. He liked it when his father sat in his chair with a clean white shirt and a necktie and a vest and a fresh cigar, eating candy, nuts, and fruit out of bowls, laughing, talking to everybody sitting there, all neat and combed and rosy-faced from the holiday. He liked to have his mother putting tinsel and cotton snow and bulbs and decorations on the Christmas tree, and Rosie helping her. And a big turkey roasting in the oven and filling the house with its delicious smells. And Liz on the floor reading the funnies, and Joe and Charlie and Ruthie and Petey all there. The whole family in the quiet house at Christmas.
They all went crazy in the house. The singing went on around the piano. Big Mr. Cartier was doing a crazy dance with his wife's hat on backwards. It was too much for Mickey, who had to sit down in a corner and giggle. For a moment, he was worried when the Christmas tree shook a little from side to side. But it had been well secured to the floor. Joe had done the job himself, and he guessed it wouldn't fall over. He went over and threw more tinsel on the branches. Ruthie was whispering to Mrs. Mulligan, "That's Mickey's blue star up there on top of the tree. Every year we've got to get up on a chair and put it up, or else, or else." Mickey heard, but he paid no attention. He just stood before the tree with his hands clasped before him. Then his mother came running over and threw her arms around him, saying, "Oh, my little Mickey, he loves his tree so much."
"Where's your present to me?" cried Ruthie. "Where did you put all your presents?" "In the cellar." "Well, it is time to bring them up now. Bring them up, and we'll lay them under the tree with all the others." So Mickey went downstairs and came up a moment later with a pile of packages, all crudely wrapped in his own secret way. "Oh, you wrapped them up nice," cried Ruthie, "but I'll fix them up with ribbons and everything. Is this mine? Oh, I can tell what's in mine." "No, you can't," Mickey affirmed sternly. "How can you if you ain't seen it?" "I can guess, can't I? It's about big enough for a bottle of perfume." "Ha, ha, ha," he laughed savagely. She had guessed it right on the nose. He smote his brow incredulously. "Boy, oh boy, are you off. You're a million miles off."
"I am," murmured Ruth with hesitation, realizing somehow that he was taking the whole thing altogether seriously. And in a rush of tenderness, she kissed him impulsively on the cheek. She knew what it all meant to passionate Mickey, Christmas, and the realization of his feelings filled her suddenly with a longing to guard over his little devotions. "At midnight," she said to him softly, "in about half an hour, you and I and Ma are going to midnight mass. And when we come back, everybody will open their presents. And I bet you'll be a million miles off guessing what I got you." "Oh, your guess was a billion miles off," yelled Mickey with a broad smile. "Well, then I'll get a big surprise. And I bet you can't ever guess what I got for you. There it is, under the tree." "Let me see."
She handed him a large package. He judiciously weighted it in his hands, turned it upside down to see if it would rattle or make any revealing noises. He shook it, held it up to the light, put his ear against it with a crafty, mysterious look. He wanted Ruth to think that he had secret methods of his own for determining such things. But finally he admitted, "Nah, I guess I can't." "You're no better at guessing than I am." Ruth laughed and kissed him once again. Then there were more uproars in the house as Mr. Cartier yelled, "Beans! It's time to eat them beans. Where's the bean pot? George, I'm genuinely sorry. I know you had them baked beans done for Christmas morning tomorrow, but I gotta eat them beans." They trooped into the kitchen where Mr. Cartier began to eat the beans.
"Well, I'll tell you," said Martin. "If you want to make up for this, ask Santa Claus if he's got a woman who can bake a pot of beans like Marge, and that's what I'll take." The noisy merriment swirled and rolled. It was as though the very windows were rattling. Joe and Rose were opening up another bottle of whiskey, and Peter came hurrying into the kitchen with some ice cream and ginger ale. He gave Mickey a glass and showed him how to make ice cream soda. Out in the parlor, Liz was dancing around with Charlie, trying to show him the jitterbug, and suddenly Liz swept Mickey up and danced him around the room, and he jumped about to show her he could do it better than Charlie. It was almost time for midnight mass now, but everybody was having so much fun, and everything was so crazy and funny that Mickey almost didn't want to go to church after all.
Finally, his mother got their coats, and they started out on foot with Ruth and walked off in the frosty, quiet night. Mickey was sublimely happy now. All along the streets, people began to appear from their houses, afoot or in cars, all moving in the same direction. It amazed Mickey that the whole night was full of voices and the crunch of steps over the hard snow, even though it was almost midnight. And again, he looked up to gaze at the stars, which seemed to touch the rooftops of the houses, icy bright and trembling, and hovering over the snowy chimneys and over the sleep of little children smaller than he, who believed that Santa Claus would soon be climbing down those chimneys. From the open door of the church, warm golden light swarmed out on the snow. The sound of the organ and singing could be heard.
Inside the church, there was the delightful smell of overcoats, fresh from the cold night, mingled with the incense and flowers. Everyone was settling down for mass, the men fingering their hats devoutly, blowing their noses, looking around and nodding, the women adjusting their hats and prayer beads with sharp prim movements. Mickey gazed with fearful awe at the beautiful crib on one side of the gleaming white altar, representing the Christ child in the manger, the Mother Mary bending over him, silent and immobile, Joseph standing mournfully by, all of it bathed in the soft blue light that came from the enormous star. The three wise kings stood apart with concentrated devotion, frozen in sorrowful intensity, as though they knew that the whole world was looking at them, and the moment must never be disturbed, nor the little child Jesus who lay in the crib in a halo of silent, miraculous light.
The choir boys, which had been quietly assembling on each side of the altar, began to sing in small, high voices. "Oh, they sing like little angels," whispered the mother ecstatically to Ruth. And she dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. "I can't help it. I have to cry when I hear those sweet little voices." 3 little girls wearing the uniform of the church's sodality came out and stood in front of the communion rail and raised trumpets to their lips, while titterings went softly around the pews, and in clear, though occasionally flat tones, they began to play "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." The voices of the choir boys and the sudden soft inclusion of the organ accompaniment turned the rendition of the little girls into a huge success, and when they hurried back to their front pews, everybody was smiling benevolently in their direction. Finally, the priest came out, followed by his train, and everybody rose for the beginning of Mass.
Standing next to Mickey throughout the Mass was a wiry little man who gave off a very strong odor of alcohol. He stood stiffly and motionlessly with his hands clasped to the pew in front of him, or sat in an erect and rigid posture without moving a muscle, as though he might have been afraid that the slightest move would betray the fact that he had been drinking. When he kneeled, he lowered himself with slow and painful dignity to the knee rest and hooked his elbows over the pew, taking firm hold with his hands in a movement that was furtive and at the same time singularly devout. Mickey could not take his eyes off the man's great, powerful brown hands as he draped them over the pew and clutched at the wood, at the great knots of muscle and vein on them, and at the large black rosary beads that were wound delicately about the hand and hung rattling gently against the back of the pew. It seemed strange to Mickey that this man had come to midnight Mass. In spite of his small stature, he looked fiercely powerful and strong, almost savage. His eyes were dark and authoritative, and the cords in his wind-burnt neck stood out like pillars. And he seemed to Mickey like a wild hermit from a mountain cave, with all his silent, ferocious need.
When communion time came, the man turned to the big woman next to him and nodded to her. And instantly a file of children started from the pew, followed by the big woman and the little man, who walked and hobbled like the bow-legged French-Canadian farmer that he was. They all marched slowly down to the altar, where the little man ordered the procession of his family along the altar rail by a series of imperceptible signs. Mickey watched broodingly as the man and his family kneeled at the altar. The little altar bell jingled as the priest raised the ciborium. Everybody in the church lowered their heads, but Mickey raised his head slightly and thrilled at the sight of the vast plain of bowed heads everywhere, until he caught eye of another little boy who was looking around, and they both dipped back quickly.
Mickey was now growing a little tired of the Mass. He wanted to go back home and open the presents and see what he had for Christmas, but he began to do another rosary on his beads for fear he had not prayed enough. It was then that his pensive gaze fell once more on the manger scene beside the altar, and a shiver of surprise ran through him. For a moment, he imagined that he himself lay in the crib, that he himself was the Christ child, and that the Virgin Mary was his own mother. This strange feeling grew in him until he held his gaze fixed on the beautiful scene, hypnotized with wonder. The scene almost seemed to come to life for him, and he fancied that he had seen a blush of pleasure growing on Mary's cheeks. And at that precise moment, a low, mournful note from the organ filled the church. With unaccountable swiftness, Mickey's eyes burned with imminent tears.
He was carried away by a fearsome emotion of great sadness, the kind he felt when he was alone in his room in the middle of the night. Then the boy looked up again at the altar manger and saw that he too must suffer and be crucified for his sake, who pointed out his guiltiness that way, but who also pointed out what was going to happen to him, for he too, Michael Martin, was a child with a holy mother. Therefore, He too would be drawn to Calvary, and the wind would begin to screech, and everything would get dark. This would be some time after he was a cowboy in Arizona on the Tonto Rim. And then he thought about his brother Charlie. Did he hurt him that time when he threw a piece of slate, and it hit Charlie in the back of the head, and Charlie ran into the kitchen, crying?
Charlie, Charlie, the boy thought to himself with anguish. I didn't mean to do it, honest. I didn't know. Forgive me, God. Jesus, Joseph, Charlie, forgive me. Like Pa forgave you for breaking those windows. Oh, Charlie, will my Christmas present make you glad? Will it make you like me? It's a good scout knife. I bought it on money I saved since way back in October. Those were little Mickey's rushing inward tortured thoughts, and he sighed now suddenly. The altar boys were singing again with the vigorous tone of completion. The Mass was almost over. The altar boys were sinners and hypocrites. He knew some of them, especially Mulrooney there in the back, so innocent looking, who killed snakes along the river by frying them in tin cans, and blew up frogs with straws, and the blond boy, Bailey, who sold newspapers, and hit Raymond one day in the schoolyard and made his nose bleed. But they, too, were being saved. Although they could do what they liked. He was heading west himself. Soon, maybe.
Suddenly, Mickey wondered if everybody else believed in God like he did. They told him Santa Claus first. He was God's friend, they said. But now he knew that was just a lot of stuff for kids. Was God really everywhere around and not just sitting in heaven, not looking down? Everybody in church went about under God's look like they were only lining up after recess, and yawning and coughing and fidgeting. The little noises of noon and the smell of lunches and orange peels and the crunching of shoes in the gravel in the schoolyard, that wasn't God. And the priest talking about how the people did not give enough for a parish, and the way people threw their money in the baskets angrily almost, that wasn't God. All this shuffling and coughing and nose blowing in church wasn't God.
Yet all the beautiful singing and the organ in the church, yes, it was God's music for God. But he also liked Home on the Range and Bury Me Not on the Lone Prairie just as much. These songs made him see the cowboys loping across the sage on their Mustangs in the big, sad sunset, and made him cry for the death of Waddies in the Montana Roundup. Now, in a minute, it would be time to go home, to walk in the late night among all the people smoking and laughing and heading home to open presents and eat and celebrate, and across the field, under the stars, in the shadows of the houses where the little kids were sleeping. Maybe this year he would see the angel walking across the snow at last.
Merry Christmas, Jack.